As Ron Placone covered earlier this week here on Status Coup, one of the largest railroad unions in the country just voted against the latest contract that was up for a vote. For those of you who are regular viewers, you likely know that there are 12 big railroad unions in the country. You've probably heard talks that a strike might be coming soon. Basically, the rationale for that, because several of these unions have actually voted yes on this agreement, several have not voted for it, and then again, just recently, one of the largest unions in the country voted no against it. The reason everyone is very worried about this at this point is that if any of these unions decide to strike, out of solidarity, all of these unions will strike at the same time, essentially meaning a complete shutdown of the rail system in the United States. The major reason why these workers are essentially fighting for better contracts is that they're basically getting no time off. For the purposes of this, they get no time off. They get 1 day a month in a lot of cases, maybe 2 days a month. If they have to take a sick day, it's nearly impossible to do. They're not getting any paid sick days. So really these workers are fighting just for a couple more days off a month to spend with their families, and so far they haven't gotten it. The contracts to this point that have been put out have definitely increased pay in a lot of cases, but they're not really trying to solve the main gripe from workers that they're not having enough time off in any serious way, hence why, again, this large railroad union voting against the deal. We've heard a lot of different voices saying that a railroad strike is imminent. I am not going to be one of those voices today, and I will lay out exactly why I think that a railroad strike is not happening, and that instead what is going to happen is that these workers are going to be forced to work rather than strike until some sort of arrangement can be met. So essentially, the way that this works is that Congress has the authority to prevent a railroad strike, at least for a period of time, under the Railroad Labor Act. This was passed back in the 1920s. It essentially defines railroads as being essential infrastructure. And back then they knew that if this essential infrastructure were to stop for any reason, obviously the 1920s, lots of union activity going on, lots of striking going on, that it would have major detrimental effects across the country. I won't get into the history of why it passed and how it was created and everything, but just know that the way that Congress would do this is through the Railroad Labor Act that occurred back in the 1920s. There's been a couple amendments since then, but it's largely the same as what it was back at that time frame. Now, you're probably asking, why would Democrats do this, right? Democrats most of them just spent a good chunk of the midterms pushing their pro-union messaging to help win elections. Basically, like, abortion obviously was a big issue during the midterms, but unions and just workers' rights in general has been at the forefront of Democrat politics for several months, over a year basically at this point. So why do we think that Democrats would do this? They still have both chambers of Congress. First off, again, I hope that they don't do this, but I just don't have any faith in them to do otherwise. We'll see, but there are a couple reasons why I think that this is imminent from happening. The first is some clips that I found of Marty Walsh over the last couple months. For those of you who don't know, Marty Walsh is the labor secretary for President Biden. I almost just said President Obama. For President Biden. Marty Walsh had a really positive tone back in September when he helped to make these latest negotiations happen. These negotiations are what have been being voted on by the unions, what one of the largest unions just voted against. Let's take a clip of this from back in September and hear what Labor Secretary Walsh sounded like back then.
Membership vote hasn't happened yet. How confident are you it's going to come through?
Yeah, I feel confident. You know, this is a good deal, and obviously the leadership of the unions were very active last night, and they're going to go out and talk to their members about what's in this deal. And I think that there's a lot of good things in this deal that for workers and respecting workers, and certainly the president was very clear today as well that he respects the workers that work on the train. They took us through a pandemic. They've been working without a contract for the last 2 years. So it's important that they're respected, and I think when they get a chance to hear their leadership and hear their negotiating teams about what's in this deal, I hopefully that we'll get a positive vote.
It's important that they're respected. At that point, it seems like Labor Secretary Walsh seemed to think that this would go through. He calls it a good deal. Obviously, a lot of the railroad workers do not agree with him that it's a good deal. Like I mentioned kind of earlier on in this, did it increase their wages? Yes. Would this deal have increased their wages? Yes. But does it solve the main complaint of the workers, which is time off and needing more of it and wanting some paid sick leave, no, it really does not solve that issue in any significant way. Now, let's fast forward to earlier this month, and let's see if you can spot the difference in how Labor Secretary Walsh is talking now.
You've been part of the negotiations with the rail unions. You mentioned that just there. Why haven't they signed the agreement?
We have 6 of the 12 agreed upon. We have 4 contracts still out, and we have 2 contracts that were voted down by the members that we're currently, I'm encouraging both sides, the rail and the companies, to stay at the table and get another opportunity to get another vote on before we hit our deadline in November and December.
Are you actively involved in the negotiation again?
I'm not actively involved in, per se, the negotiation as far as what's in and out of the contract, but I am very active in making sure, in talking to, I talk to the representatives of the companies on a daily basis, and I talk to different unions almost on a daily basis as well, to make sure, particularly the 2 unions that didn't ratify the contract. 6 unions have ratified. There's another one going to come in the next couple days, and then we'll have 3 left out there. So hopefully by this time next week, we will have many of these contracts ratified, and we're down to the last 2.
Hope. What if we don't get that?
Yeah.
What preparations have you done just in case this falls apart?
Well, there's a process that goes in place. And the worst case scenario, I'll play worst case scenario for a minute. If we don't get to an agreement, Congress will have to take action. And that is by design in the Railway Act.
I didn't hear much talk about respecting workers in that one. I heard that the worst case scenario in Union man President Biden's administration essentially saying that the worst case scenario is for Congress to act. Nothing about respecting workers' wish to go on strike. I didn't hear that at all. So even, again, Marty Walsh does have a history, and I believe he was in a union for a long period of time, or maybe is probably still a card-carrying member of a union. However, it seems pretty interesting how quickly the tides turned from September to November on this issue. I mean, again, those clips are 2 months apart. In that, it doesn't seem to me that Marty Walsh thinks that a strike is coming anytime soon. He thinks that Congress is essentially just going to come in, worst case scenario, Congress is going to come in and essentially force these workers back to work while there is some sort of mediation process that goes on between the rail bosses, the big corporations there, and between the rail workers unions. I don't know. Despite that change in tone, he doesn't have any unilateral authority. Biden doesn't have any unilateral authority. This would need to go through Congress. I'm sure that this would have bipartisan support from a lot of folks. We'll see if it gets actually put up for a vote. I'm sure that it will. The question is who is going to vote for it. Let's be real, though. This is a lame duck Congress, right? So the election just happened, and to be straight up, they don't need you anymore. You already elected them. We already elected them. So now they can forget about us for a little bit because they're counting on you and me and everybody else to have a short memory, right? There's not another election for a lot of these folks for 2 years, give or take, maybe a little bit less if they're in a primary or a contentious primary, of which there are not many of those these days. But they don't really need us anymore. That's at least what I think they're going to be thinking here. Biden and the Dems are going to need to weigh their options here. There's kind of 2 main things, in my opinion, that they're going to need to decide between. Number 1 is if they decide to prevent the strike from happening and they're able to pass this through Congress, they're going to essentially go back on this pro-union image that they've had, this pro-union messaging that they ran their campaigns on the last year up until these midterms. And they're going to have to force these people back to work. Now, what is that going to do? That's going to really piss off their base, I guess, right? The progressive voters are definitely going to be upset about this. Folks like me are definitely going to be upset about this. And then they're probably counting, though, that okay, just purely looking at this politically, which is gross, but it's what they're doing. The folks who are kind of swing votery folks, kind of in the middle, are going to be okay, the Democrats here are preventing a strike from happening, which is preventing the cost of goods from going up and preventing some chaos going on. I don't need the chaos. My prices are already high on a lot of things right now. maybe those folks start to look at that and be like, oh, the Democrats are doing something to make prices go down. Meanwhile, they're stabbing folks in the back who they campaigned for months and months and months on, saying that they're pro-union and that they support these folks. But again, they're counting on that short memory. So that's one thing that they could be potentially weighing. Again, this is grossly looking at it politically. But a lot of these folks are doing it. Let's face it, they're politicians. This is what they do. The other thing that they can look at is, okay, let's say that they let the strike happen, right? That's kind of option 2. Option 1 is prevent the strike, which I just outlined there. Option 2 is let the strike happen. What is going to be the repercussions from that? Well, one, the Democratic base and progressive voters and folks will be happy with them that they, stuck to their word and actually are supporting these workers. But the rest of the country is going to look at this and be like, okay, prices of goods are going up. There's strikes going on all over the place. Gas prices have already been high for a year. Biden's done a terrible job on inflation. This is only going to make it worse. And voters who are kind of those swing type voters that I mentioned, who they're probably not paying attention to politics all year, but in the last 2 weeks before the election, they'll kind of make their decisions. Those folks are going to look at that in a negative light. I think that that's probably the math that they're looking at and saying, hey, which one of these do we think are going to be better? Now, my thoughts are that the Democratic base is going to vote with the Democrats no matter what right now. I think that they did not a great job in this midterm campaign, but they did way, way better results-wise than I ever thought they would, and that's because the base decided to come and vote for them on these major issues. Abortion, I think unions had a big part of it. And again, also to vote against the chaos on the Republican side of the aisle and the absolute batshit stuff that they're talking about. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It's definitely a swing one way or the other. I'm definitely curious to hear what you all think. This is definitely a tricky subject. Do you think that the Democrats are going to let there actually be a strike? Or do you think that they're going to put this up for a vote in Congress and prevent a strike from happening, at least for a period of time, right? There is still a chance that a strike happens after this extra phase of negotiation kind of mediated by a third party within the government through this Railway Act. But it's unlikely that they'll let it get to that point because there's lots of provisions, without getting into the nitty-gritty, that kind of prevent a strike from happening on what they see as a minor issue versus a major issue. We'll see ultimately where it goes, but I actually want to know what you guys think. Leave a comment below. I'll check them out later and see where your thoughts are on this railroad strike. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. If you're interested to see more of this, definitely subscribe down below. Hit the notification bell to get notified when we release a video. You can also follow me on Twitter at LewisD217. Thank you, guys. If you don't see us, we're going to probably have some content coming out over the weekend. I know it's a holiday weekend, so definitely stay tuned for some of that. But happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy your time with family and friends, and we will see you all later.